Hey guys, so I remember like maybe 7 years ago I did this music night and there was this guy running it who was much older. He was much older than all the performers, you know, and he was like, I don't know, he looked well into his 60s and he made pretty weird music, quite bad, like experimental music, and it was a sort of pill, like Public Image Limited type thing. That was the kind of sound, you know, that some of like the older guys are into that, and if it's done well it can be quite good, like pill, but if it's not done well it's, you know, it's pretty awful. And this guy was doing that and he was running this night, and it was a pretty big night, and it would have been for me like the best show I had done, and I was really excited to do this show, you know, and my girlfriend came with me and we were both buzzing like, this is going to be huge, this is such a good audience and it's the right place for me and everything. And then this guy who was running the night, who I don't know, I'm not saying to be mean, he was a bit sort of, he was just a bit limp, like he was just a bit, he just seemed a bit sad for his age, to be honest. Like he just seemed a bit like he I don't know, a bit insecure and a bit immature basically. So he had been entrusted with a pretty huge responsibility in running this night. It was really a big night, and he wasn't managing it very well, and he was like, he was letting everyone go over. So people were doing their sets and there was meant to be a very specific time limit, and it was very important that we stuck to that, and he allowed a lot of people to very obnoxiously go way over the permitted time, which is a really, on a night like that was supposed to be as regimented as that was, it was a really shitty thing for them to do. Sorry about the construction noise if you can hear it. It was a really shitty thing for the performers to do, and quite infuriating to watch when all the other performers were waiting there, like thinking, you know, I want to be able to go up, and as well, you know, ridiculous that he didn't stop it. And they had already set like a time limit on the event. That was the limit. He couldn't go beyond that limit, and he'd booked X amount of people and planned it that way. And we just watched as like person after person went up and was like, I'm gonna do one more song, sorry guys, I'm just loving it up here, you know. And we're just like, oh my god. And obviously in music there's a lot of spoiled kids in music, particularly the ones who actually have the time and freedom to really pursue it. There's a lot of sort of bankrolled rich kids, and those are often the ones who behave extremely inappropriately in relation to everyone else, and they kind of get away with it because they have this sort of bizarre kind of like Brooklyn Beckham-esque confidence that's just unshakable, and that kind of allows them to get by in life quite well, and they're able to behave horribly without ever really having to, you know, experience too many repercussions. So anyway, they were going on and the night was going on, and then it got to, you know, near when I was supposed to go up, and I kept asking, I kept going over, I kept going, mate, this is going on really long, and he's going, I know, yeah. And I was like, but you're running the night, you know, this is really going on too long. And he was like, I know, man, yeah, crazy, innit? They keep, and I was like, you're running the night, you need to stop this, you know, people keep going over, there's loads of us yet to perform. And he was like, yeah, no, I hear you, mate. And just wouldn't do anything about it, like wouldn't stop anyone. He'd just stand there like, just watching their shows. And I was getting furious at this stage, thinking, you're a fucking grown man, you know, like pull yourself together and stop this, you're affecting everybody. Anyway, got to near the point where I was meant to do my set, and I was like, dude, I'm getting tired, you know, like it's late. He's done my set, and he goes, you're not gonna be able to go on. And I was like, huh? And he was like, you're not gonna be able to go on, I'm sorry, they're kicking me out at 11, you're not gonna be able to go on, they won't let me. And I was like, no, I'm going on. And he was like, you're not going to be able to. And I was like, what do you mean? Like, I've come here, I was booked, I've waited here all night, I'm fucking playing. And he was like, nah, sorry mate, can't. Kind of door closed, fuck off. And I remember it vividly. I was like, whoa. I was like this close to punching. I remember like, I was as close to punching him as I could have been without punching him. Do you know what I mean? I was literally a whisker away from punching an old man, basically. He was an old man, you know. He didn't act like it, but he was, and physically he was an old man. And it wouldn't have been a controlled punch, you know. And I mean, thank God I didn't. You never know, a situation like that, at a minimum, that's going to end very, very badly. You don't punch old men. At a minimum, it's going to end badly, and there is no maximum to how badly that could end. You know, you kill someone, you end up in prison. It's just, oh, it turns out he's hard as nails. Secretly, he's been hiding it really well, and he fucking kills me. So you know, thank God that didn't happen, and it wouldn't happen now. It wouldn't even come close to happening now. I know that, but yeah, at the time, you know, I was so angry. And I remember thinking about it afterwards, and I was like, why did that make me so angry? And obviously on the surface, there are obvious reasons to be angry about that. It was a really annoying and stupid thing that he did. It was very inconsiderate of all the people who were waiting. Lots of people were really angry. I was not the only one who was really angry. I mean, the full story of that night is crazy, because me and my girlfriend kicked off massively and had an enormous row with some of the other performers and chewed them out. And we got thrown out by security in the end, and it was kind of funny and mental. I mean, I was steaming afterwards, because some of the performers were just so unpleasantly obnoxious and up their own arses, and it was really left a sour taste. But you know, whilst what he did was infuriating, it wasn't normal for me to feel that way, relative to anything, but also relative to myself at the time. You know, I dealt with plenty of cunty things like that. Never felt that way. I never felt like I'm so viscerally angry in the pit of my stomach that like there's no way to express it with words. I'm so furious at what you're saying to me and how you're speaking to me. And you know, afterwards I thought about it, and I thought it was and I don't normally do sort of the Freudian armchair analysis of everything like this. I think sometimes things are a bit simpler, and sometimes things are just what they are on the surface. But I could feel distinctly this feeling of anger, and I knew what it was because I'd felt it before for my dad. And it was one of the few situations where it was very clear to me, it was very obvious, you know, there wasn't any doubt. I was really angry in that moment at my dad. And it kind of stuck with me, because maybe sometimes I didn't realise how angry I was at my dad, and how unable to express it I felt. And sometimes still do, you know. And over the years I've noticed, like, amongst my peers, like, I don't really know anyone who has a good relationship with their dad. I've known a couple. I knew one guy who had a good relationship with his dad, and it wasn't perfect, but it was definitely good. Like, they were friends, and I envied that, and it made me sad to be around, particularly at that time, because at that time in my life, me and my dad, we never spoke other than to fight. We had daily arguments when I was a teenager. Every time there was a sort of limitless intensity to them, and they never really, we didn't have a physically confrontational relationship. A couple of times, kind of, you know, this and that happened, but not really. It was just very emotionally intense, very angry and hateful towards one another, and critical of one another, and just obviously didn't get along at all. Really had a fairly intense kind of dislike for one another and our respective behaviour. And so yeah, I had this one friend who had a good relationship with his dad, and it used to make me depressed sometimes. And I had also people who had worse relationships with their dads than I had with mine, and I had people whose dads abandoned them, and I saw the colossal impact that had on their self-esteem. For some people, I've seen people's dads just destroy them, like just mentally and emotionally just destroy them, and show that they don't even really care if you live or die. And the effect that has on a person is sort of incalculable, I guess. And so I've also always been grateful that I haven't had that. You know, my dad does care if I live or die, and deep down, beneath it all, we do love each other, not in the most straightforward way, not in a way that's easy, but you know, if he were to die, I would be devastated, and I would want to speak to him, and I would, you know, I would wish he was still alive, and if I heard that someone did something to him, I would be furious, you know, and if he was in trouble and I could help, I would help, and I know that the same goes both ways. That's about as far as it goes, I would say, and that's not nothing at all. That's what family is, really, you know. That is the essential core of family. That's the sort of the kernel or whatever, you know. That's like the kernel. I mean, kernel is in kernel of truth, Kernel, not the kernel. Perhaps a lot of people's dads, maybe even mine, are kind of like kernels, but that's not what I mean. The kernel, not the KFC kernel. I would say probably I have maybe slightly more jovial associations with the KFC kernel, especially now because I'm fasting and haven't eaten all day. Be a bit weird to fast all day and then have KFC for breakfast, but definitely manageable. Anyway, that is it really with family, you know. I mean, yeah, like some people have these really strong relationships and they're friends and they, you know, they communicate and they but basically, if you have people who care if you live or die and would defend you in a fight and would try to help you if you were really suffering, then you're lucky in relation to a lot of people. You've got a family. It might be a dysfunctional one. It might not be. It might be one that's caused you a lot of trauma even, and made in some ways life harder than it needed to be, and perhaps that goes both ways. Maybe you've had that effect on them, but ultimately, like, that's the starter pack. That's like the family, the basic, you know. So you know, you've got a family and some people don't, so it's important from that point of view to have perspective. And yeah, I've seen what it can do when, you know, when people's dads abandon them. It's like, it's a pain so profound that people can't, they don't even, I don't think they can even conceptualize it or feel it. I think it's something that just affects you deep in your psyche and affects everything that happens for the rest of your life. Most of the time, not always. I've known some people who are incredibly strong and inspiring characters who come out of those circumstances and it makes them, if anything, maybe stronger, and that's truly incredible. But I don't think it's the norm. I think it's the norm that you know, that feeling in the back of your mind, like this person didn't want me enough to stick around and doesn't want to be near me, that tells you more than words can ever tell you. And it says things about you that, you know, no amount of words or positive experiences can really erase from your sort of center, you know. But yeah, you know, oh, look at that, how does that even happen? Someone's opened a pizza and left the who was eating a pizza in such a hurry that they're like, fuck this, I want to eat this pizza, it's cold pizza, I'm not even going to cook it, fuck off. Just threw the packet on the floor. That is absolutely psychotic. A fucking pizza. Like, you see that sometimes, you see the weirdest litter, like someone who's eaten like 20 cheese singles and just like the packets are all over the streets. Like, what happened? You went absolutely mad on a packet of cheese singles. Is that like a hobo who's like finally, like, the drugs are wearing off and the hunger's kicking in from days of not eating and they're just like, cheese singles, cold pizza? I don't know, it's absolutely mad. But yeah, so, you know, I've known a lot of people who have good relationships with their mums. A lot, you know, and I mean, mostly I know men. I don't know that many women, but like a lot of women, definitely, maybe not as common. I do feel that most men I know have good relationships with their mums. Not all of them, that's for sure. And again, not straightforward relationships, not always easy. Often there's a lot of resentment and trauma and difficulty, but yeah, I'd say, you know, probably the majority of men I've known have a reasonable relationship with their mum. The vast majority have a relationship with their dad that they don't even really want to talk about. And I've always found that strange, and I've wondered, is that a generational thing? Is that to do with the world we live in today? Is that just nature? Is that just because they're the kind of people I know? Is it to do with the political climate? Is it just to do, you know, and I think there's truth in many of those different explanations. I don't think there's any one thing. I also think I'm a middle class person, and so we had some money when I was growing up, and sometimes I watch, you know, shows and stuff, and just from people I've known in real life as well, like families who've grown up very poor, especially if they've lived on benefits or in council properties, and there's been less of the dad has occupied less of a breadwinner role. Those dads often seem to take more of a hands-on approach to raising their sons, and sometimes you see dads who, you know, if they're not earning much or they're not supporting the family, they're very, I guess the way that they can contribute is keeping their sons kind of in line and making sure also that they're kind of getting involved with them. I don't know how to describe it. Getting involved with them and being taking an interest in them, even if sometimes it's not always in the nicest way, like taking an interest in them and also making sure they're sort of like tough and caring about their development as a human being. I feel like sometimes earning money and giving it to your family and taking care of your family can become a way of saying, there you go, I've done my fucking bit, shut the fuck up and leave me alone and let me focus on my own life and my own hobbies. And I don't know, I would never have kids if I felt that was going to be my mode of operation. I mean, like, I'd really like to have kids, particularly I'd prefer to have sons, but you know, you can't control, well, you can, I don't want to, but you know, I don't I guess maybe I've gone too far the other way, but I can really see the importance in being a part of helping them grow as a person and helping them flourish as a person. And I know that, like, you know, it's important to have money, it's important to have a future, it's important to have all these things, but I know that someone who's comfortable in themselves and doesn't have much but is good at maintaining relationships and is comfortable in themselves is a lot better off than someone who's got loads of money and has no capacity for relationships and hates themselves and is, you know, miserable. Obviously, like, you know, the former is better. Ideally you'd have both, but I kind of I envision fatherhood, I guess, as a more actively involved thing. There are various things that jump out at me. In the film Fight Club, he says, Brad Pitt's character says, we're a generation of men raised by women. And I don't know about, I mean, I don't know why or when that would have been different, or if that's even the case anymore. I mean, like, my parents both worked. They worked together. I just had a lot more to do with my mum. And so I don't think that was purely circumstantial or societal. I just had a lot more to do with my mum and spoke to her a lot more and felt a lot more comfortable around her. So I don't know if that was a product of its time in the way that he was suggesting, because I don't know. I'm curious to know what this generation of fathers will be like, and I'm kind of inclined to believe, despite a lot of the weird stuff that's going on in our culture at the moment, and there's a lot of sickness in terms of, you know, the way kids are raised now, I'm somewhat inclined to believe that my generation, at least people I know, most of us would probably be better dads than ours were. More interested, I guess. And yet, you know, women work now. Maybe that's part of it, you know, because there wouldn't be this. I don't know really. I haven't eaten all day and I'm struggling to form that thought into something comprehensible, but, you know, whatever. The show Succession, I didn't really like that show that much. I thought it was a bit overrated. I got a bit bored watching it, but the thing I felt it did very well was it was a bit the comedy in it was very, like, you know, I found it a bit tedious, like, oh, isn't that clever, aren't we all witty? And I just got a bit bored of that. I love the work of the guy who wrote it. He wrote Peep Show. I felt with Peep Show it was just a lot funnier. It was like the dialogue was really funny. It wasn't sort of like, hey, like a kind of raised eyebrow, like, wasn't that one good? Oh my god. It was a bit more just like, it was just fucking funny. Succession I found a bit smug and tedious, I guess, and a bit overrated. It was very nicely produced, nicely shot and well acted, and objectively quite a good show, but anyway, not really for me. But the dynamic around the dad, which is obviously, like, you know, the central component of the show, the family dynamic surrounding the dad, I felt was very, I think about it a lot, you know, I think about that show a lot, and that's an extreme example, but it's quite a, probably for many people, quite a relatable one. Particularly, I think for my generation, because most of our parents, most, not all, have a decent amount of, like, property and wealth because of the time they lived in, and there was a sort of, I think that was the exception. I don't think now is the exception. I don't think now that things are so difficult is the exception. I think the time they lived in was the exception to the rule of, you know, life being financially and economically very difficult. There are a couple of generations where it was like seemingly quite a lot easier than it is now, but basically that wasn't really normal, I don't think. And anyway, so a lot of our parents have this wealth, and dads tend to be kind of like the custodians of this wealth. And in the show, the dad is he kind of knows that everybody is kind of circling around him, waiting for him to die. They want a piece of what he's made, they want a piece of his money. Everyone wants stuff that he's got. And at the same time, that is true. They are, you know, in some ways like dependent on him. They don't have to be, obviously. Most of them could, in that show in particular, could easily make their own way in life, but they're used to living, you know, in this particular lifestyle and whatever. And so he's kind of like perpetually pissed off that everyone wants a piece of him, and also the other side of him that they want, he has zero interest in giving, like the more personable side, and, you know, treating them like humans and talking to them. He's obviously shown like zero interest in that, and they want that from him, or not all of the characters, but you can see in different ways how it's affected them. And probably the girl is like a bit less affected, because it's a bit easier for dads to get on with their daughters because they're not as threatening. And just there's something weird about them, like mums and sons. There's something about dads and daughters that's just very, it just seems to be that most sons get on better with their mums, and a lot of girls get on very well with their dads. Not always, of course. And you know, they've kind of forever been sort of crying out for like a little bit of something, a bit of kindness from him, or interest in them, or just a bit of, you know, just a loving relationship, and he's not interested in giving it. And so then in the end, all they really can see him as is a paycheck and an opportunity. And it's a self-perpetuating kind of vicious circle type situation. And I've seen this take place with a number of people. I've known a number of people who, and I've always tried to take nothing from my parents. I haven't been successful in doing so. I've needed to borrow money at times, but I've always tried not to, and I've always been extremely uncomfortable about doing so. And as I've gotten older, that's changed a bit. I've sort of not been so hard on myself about it, but I've never been happy about it. And for me, it's exacerbated by the fact that I'm like a sort of failed artist, you know. So I've not, if I'd put my life into trying to make money, I could have done, as in trying to make money and not worrying about how I made it, and not caring about, you know, my sort of passion or whatever. I could have done, and things would be fine, you know, because I live with my girlfriend, so it's like all right when there's two of you, you know, and you're both working, it's all right. But I've always had really shit jobs and been very focused on other things. In spite of that, I've tried to avoid ever asking for anything. And I remember one time, I was thinking about this recently, I remember when I was younger, I was, you know, in my early 20s, and I was hanging out with a mate, and something about my phone contract came up. And at the time, my dad, because he'd paid the phone contract since I was at home, I had the same phone number since I was like, you know, a kid or a teenager, and I just had never really said, hey, let me pay for this, because I was sort of quietly like, oh, looks like the phone bill's been paid, you know, and just never sort of said anything about it, and let him keep paying it. And it was like £14 a month or something, so, you know, $17 or $18 or something probably at the time. And I had kept this as like a shameful secret. I thought this was like so embarrassing and shameful that I let my dad pay for my phone contract, which is, you know, a measly sum of money, obviously, between family. And I was so uncomfortable about this, and I mentioned it came up with a friend, and he said something like, I think he picked up that I was trying, and he went, does your dad pay for it? Because I said something, he said, why can't you just change the contract, or why can't you do this? And I sort of hesitated to explain. He went, your dad pay for yours? And I went, yeah. And I was like really embarrassed, and he went, that's fine, I don't care, my dad gives me like £200 a month. And I was like, really? He was like, yeah. And this was a guy who's a completely normal guy, and he had a job and stuff. He was like, yeah, he gives me like £200 a month as a standing order. And I was like, what the fuck? Like, I couldn't believe it. And I was like very relieved that I didn't have to feel embarrassed about the phone contract, and also quite surprised that his dad, who'd been sometimes quite strict, you know, gave him that much money. And I thought, wow, it's kind of crazy if even this guy who works and is, I feel, not spoiled and is a normal guy, is getting a £200 standing order from his dad. That's kind of crazy. And it opened my mind a little bit, and I thought, maybe it's not so shameful for your dad to pay £14 a month phone contract, or whatever it was, £17, I don't fucking remember. But it wasn't expensive. And I've realised over time, like, almost everybody, I mean, if you know, I read an article about it the other day, and it was kind of funny. Like, it was like the sort of the shameful secret that all homeowners have, and it was about how, hang on, let me stop and start this because I'm worried the battery's going to die. Yeah, so it was about how basically anyone who's kind of our age and owns a home, if you really speak to them, they won't tell you at first. They'll go, yeah, worked really hard, did this and that. Their parents bought it for them most of the time, even if they have a good job. Most of the time they couldn't afford to buy it themselves. And some people, I think it's kind of ridiculous, really. I think some people, they just piss their money away and they're not willing to save or adapt to the times we're living in. But there are just a lot of people who, you know, they live in a relationship, they both have jobs, they work hard, and they have no prospect of ever owning anything. And so they can't unless their parents help them. And most people carry a deep shame about this. Some people don't, and good for them, I think, to not feel that. I don't think they should. I think they just look at it for what it is, you know. And if they know they're working hard, they're trying to support themselves, and they can't, and their parents help them, like, I think, again, this is something that's gone back and forth over the generations, because I do believe there was a time, if we're looking back, you know, hundreds of years ago, where it was completely normal for families to share everything. And then it kind of became, things were good enough where it was like, no, you can go and get your own stuff. And now we've kind of going back to like where you can't really, there's not really enough stuff to go round, or it's not being allowed to go round. So you need help. And yeah, I think this creates an odd situation. I avoid getting too personal in these videos because, well, I don't like to talk about other people too much. But basically, I think part of the reason I felt weird about that was A, because we had such a bad relationship. So to me, even having this phone contract, I thought that was like a crack in my armour, you know? A vulnerability that I could be, something I could be accused of, or, you know, whatever. And a sign of my deficiencies as a person. But also, in my case, my dad's dad was very, from what I gather, from what I've been told, very mean to him about money. And he had some money, but he was quite mean to him about it, and not happy with giving him anything. And when he did, it was on quite hostile terms when he needed to borrow some. And although he grew up kind of posh, he never really had anything from his dad. And again, I don't think that was what bothered him. I don't think it was the lack of money, because had his dad simply not had the money to give him, he would have found a way around it. He would have hopefully survived and gotten on with it. I think it was the contempt and the contempt and the anger at giving it to him and the feeling of being judged that probably bothered him. And so I always felt this, and I think I felt it more than my brothers, and I think probably I kind of received messaging in this regard more than my brothers, because growing up I had a kind of reputation as a kind of like a bum, because I was really into like drugs when I was younger, and I was like trying to make music, and I wasn't interested in working, and I didn't want to, when I lived with my parents when I was very young, I was like a teenager, I didn't want to pay anything, and I didn't want to, you know, I was just like a bum and a scrounger. But that ended quite quickly, and I kind of carried that reputation, I guess, at least I think in his eyes. That never fully went away, and was also a fairly convenient thing to think about me. So yeah, I think, to get back to the point, sometimes that creates a very weird situation. Someone I know gets a lot of money from their dad, and this person has a very, very bad relationship with their dad. Their dad is probably the worst dad I've ever encountered. I mean, there was no like sexual abuse and not really any physical abuse, but apart from that, it was as bad as a dad could really be, and objectively terrible. However, this person's dad is very wealthy, and when there's a situation or this person is in trouble, the dad will go, right, I've sent £4 to your bank account. And this person developed a fairly unhealthy, I would say, dependence on this, or at least not an unhealthy dependence on it, that's incorrect. An unhealthy normalization of this, and felt that this was okay and this was just normal. And I would say, you know, you're kind of making your dad feel like this is a relationship, and by taking this when you don't need it, you're kind of accepting this form of parenting, and you're sort of debasing yourself. And this person would say, I don't fucking care, I don't like my dad, and my dad doesn't like me, and I want the money because it makes my life easier. And I think, I get the logic, I understand that, but this dynamic will never change if someone doesn't break it, and it will probably never change anyway. But I could always see how having wealth and money allowed this dad to get off scot-free for, you know, unforgivable things, having a secret second family being one of them. And this person was always able to get away with things and to kind of do what he wanted because he had a lot of money, and he could kind of throw it at people and go, there you go, I've done my bit. And I feel that this is a fairly common dynamic, and it also leads to a situation where dads can become beyond reproach. They are typically the authority figure in the house. I know that's changing now. You see all this weird stuff like, the wife's the boss, she wears the pants in this house, I'll be sleeping on the sofa tonight. And I think, all right, I don't even know what to even say about that. It's just terrible. But basically, there's a lot of men are in abusive relationships with their wives, and it's not thought of as such because it's the wife doing it. But a lot of men are in, I know obviously a lot of women are abused by their husbands as well, not for a second suggesting they aren't, but a lot of men are in abusive relationships that everybody just watches. They just look at it and everyone can see it and no one accepts it's like severe sort of psychological or emotional abuse. It's kind of insane. Sorry if it's a bit windy now, but it's very normalized for men to be like mercilessly abused and humiliated and sort of denigrated by their wives. Obviously most couples aren't like that, but it's, yeah, no, surprisingly common. Anyway, besides the point. It's surprisingly accepted by society, I guess, and normalised and seen as a good thing. which is very, very odd. Anyway, so dads, they tend to be kind of the authority, the custodians of the wealth, even though often these days both of them work, or did work before retirement. They're kind of the custodians of everything, and they're in this odd position where, you know, sometimes you see from their point of view, it feels like everyone else is like a vulture trying to get a piece of them. And from everyone else's point of view, it's kind of like there's this person who's beyond reproach. I can't really have a personal relationship with them because I can't really say what I think. And sometimes that's just a financial thing. Some people, it's a nice view I've got going on here behind me. I mean, nice view of me I've got going on here. There's sometimes other reasons that they become somewhat beyond reproach, and I think contributing or providing financially allows people to feel and be beyond reproach, particularly men, because we've been conditioned to think that that is not just that we've been conditioned. I think there's a reason we've been conditioned for that. I think some of it is innate, but certainly as well, we have kind of been conditioned to think to some degree, or we've been validated in feeling innately that if a man is sort of providing, then that's it, and that's all he needs to do. I don't agree. I think the evidence is fairly clear. It's fairly objectively clear that I think you need to do more than that as a dad, and that especially if you have sons, there's a lot you can do that's quite easy and very helpful, and, you know, allows them to grow up with, you know, self-esteem and stuff. So they're put in a position as these weird custodians of the wealth who, there's like a strange thing going on, and so I've never felt comfortable with that, and I've always thought I would rather not have a penny and just be friends. Not friends, you know, but yeah, be able to talk, be able to relate and get advice and stuff. And that's it's not been the case, to put it lightly. And I've there's a feeling I have with landlords, because a lot of people hate landlords, right? A lot of people our age, they really hate landlords, and I don't. Like, I don't resent them for having property. I don't resent them for having money. What I don't like about landlords, I have it with my current one, is when they look at you like you're dirt, and they look at you like the reason you don't have anything and they do is because you're filth, and that you're a nuisance. And it's like, look, I can accept this odd position where probably odds are you're kind of somewhat fortunate to have. There's plenty of self-made, really impressive people in this world, but like generally in sort of middle-class Western society, there's people they've worked hard, definitely, to maintain that wealth, to capitalize on it, for sure, no doubt. But most people, if they're your landlord, there's been an element of good fortune, and I don't like when they aren't aware of that, and they seem to look at you as if the reason you're renting from them is just because you're just shit, and they're better than you because they have something. Then I do get kind of pissed off, and I guess I feel somewhat the same when it comes to dads. I don't like hearing people say, that generation has everything, they ruin everything, they blah blah blah, because that's probably for the most part what we would have done. It's just the cycle of things, you know. It's just kind of, there are a lot of very valid criticisms of that generation, and I do really dislike a lot of what they did socially, culturally, to the world. I think like the 60s are romanticized as this great time. I think they kind of destroyed everything, that generation, thinking that they were doing all this great stuff, and they never stopped to consider the consequences of it, and they don't now. They're completely oblivious to the consequences of their actions. But you know, there were a lot of good intentions as well, and as for the property aspect, which is a very contentious issue between, I guess, my generation and my parents' generation and those the surrounding generations, is that you know, it was easy for them and it's hard for us, and there's a lot of resentment. And I don't feel that, because I also know that a lot of people their age are very aware of that, and they're very considerate of that. And that's why some people have these fairly healthy relationships with their parents in that regard. But what I find a bit distasteful is the implication that the reason they're in the position we're in, and the reason we're in the positions we're in, and not to speak for everyone, as I say, there's lots of people who've done extremely well for themselves my age, but I don't like when the implication is it's just because you're a fuck up, basically, and the reason I have all this stuff and you don't, and you need help from me, is because you're shit. And that, not like this is a kind of, you know, a fairly awkward situation we find ourselves in, which must presumably be for the have-nots quite taxing, quite humiliating. It's there's, you know, it's I always look at these situations as if you need something from someone, or someone's giving something to you, you should be very sensitive about how that makes them feel and how you approach that, and it's not something to take lightly at all. I think that goes both ways, and I think it's appropriate to consider how it probably feels for someone, particularly a man, to have to ask for help. And it's appropriate to consider that some of that is just life. It's just the way things are. You know, we hear endlessly about how difficult it is to afford things now, how difficult it is to live, and it's not just the property aspect. I think sometimes a bit much is made of that, but there's so many ways in which it's very difficult, and it could be a lot worse. Like, you know, it's pretty hard in our part of the world to like die of starvation, so that's great, that's really good. There are a lot of social safety nets, and I do think people overlook that. Again, I think the exception is to the rule is kind of people who grew up around the kind of 50s and onwards, 50s, 60s, 70s, who were kind of born around then. It was an unusually good time. I remember the comedian Stuart Lee talking about how when he was young and starting as a comedian, he had a job writing an obituary for a local Sunday paper, which used to take him, like, you know, didn't spend him long at all, didn't take him long at all, and he would get £50 a week, and he was able to live in London. He was able to live in London with £50 a week. I'm sure he got bits of help here and there, you know, but he was able to live and spent the rest of his time doing comedy. It was a ridiculously prosperous time, and now in most places it's quite tight, you know, and you have to be very smart, very hardworking, very disciplined to get anywhere. I have a friend who's saved a lot of money, like tens of thousands, and this friend is like frugal to a point where they could be on a reality TV show about it, you know. I mean, like frugal to a point that most people would consider freakish. I think it's really cool, but frugal to a point that's not normal at all. And still this person worries. I mean, it helps, you know, being in a relationship helps a lot, but this person worries constantly, like, will I be able to buy a house? Will I be working my whole life? Will I be able to retire at a reasonably young age after making all of this sacrifice? And it depends on where you live, it depends on what you do. It's not as simple as that, but yeah, it's tough. Let me check the battery again, one sec. Yeah, incredibly low. I might have to finish it when I finish this when I get back after charging it for a bit. But basically, yeah, it's an awkward situation in that regard, I think, for everybody. So I think that's a part of it. I think with sons as well, there's a thing of dads. I think dads can find sons kind of challenging or threatening, and there's a lot of weird shit that goes on between them. competitive is probably the wrong word, but a lot of weird hierarchical stuff that goes on that doesn't really happen between like mothers and sons, but it happens with fathers and sons a lot. And I've seen that in a lot of relationships as well between fathers and sons. And I think another reason why same gender parents often don't get on as well is because you see a lot of things that you dislike about yourself, or that you were taught to dislike about yourself, or things you were held to account for, ways that you were made to feel bad, and you see those reflected in someone who might be in some ways similar to you. I think between me and my dad, sometimes we both have our own very specific way of looking at things and doing things, and can find it difficult to do things another way, or to see things another way. And I think that's a factor, that the similarity in that regard. There's a lot of enormous differences between us. I wouldn't say that we're similar overall, but I think the ways in which we are similar can clash. They are, unfortunately, coincidentally, characteristics which can clash quite badly, as opposed to maybe some of the other similarities he has with my other brothers. They don't clash in that way, but that's not to say they have good relationships. None of us have had a good time of it. None of us have had a good relationship with him growing up, and we've been lucky in a lot of ways. And as a kind of, in many ways, as like a role model, he's been great. But none of us have had a relationship with him to speak of, really. And if we have, it's generally been on the basis of a great deal of tension. And the screen went dark. It's because my battery's about to die. Of a great deal of tension and hostility. So there's that aspect of it. Yeah. So I think those aspects come into play as well. It's something I think about a lot, because I think about having kids, and I think probably a lot of people who have kids think, I'm going to be so different to my parents, I'm going to be so much better, and then they're just as bad, or they're worse, or their kids hate them, or whatever. And I sometimes imagine, I imagine it'd be so great to have a son, and I imagine, well, maybe when I'm like, when I've got a kid who's like 12 and suddenly starts talking shit to me, I might think, fuck you, man, who do you think you are talking shit to me? I don't know. I know that we didn't, sometimes we when I was growing up, we were afraid of my dad. We were afraid of being told off by him, we were afraid of being judged by him, but we also, on some other level, we didn't really respect him in certain ways, and we were quite rude to him, and we would make fun of him in a way that I think is like not really right, to make fun of your dad as a family, at the dinner table and stuff, to make fun of him for being sort of weird or old-fashioned or whatever. I don't really think that's appropriate. I think you should have more respect for your parents. I think that's also a cultural shift. Like when he was a kid, he wasn't able to talk to his dad like that. But again, part of me is like, well, this is the world you guys wanted and you created in the 60s, where it's like, let's do away with tradition, let's do away with sort of traditional families, let's do away with a sort of culture of respect and adherence and norms, and everyone just, let's go and have sex in the park, and then we'll all make loads of money and we'll buy loads of stuff, and yeah, I'm a hippie, but also I definitely want stuff and properties and everything. If to some degree, I think that generation, some of the things they don't like about today are things that they kind of created and wanted. I do sometimes wish, I sometimes feel I feel like I might have liked to have grown up in a time that was more rigid and kind of respectful, and I think about generations before that and what they went through, and it makes me kind of sad to see what happened afterwards, and to see what happened to the world and the society that they created, and how quickly things changed, you know. I have all sorts of ideas about why that happened. I won't get into that, my battery's about to die and also it's not really relevant to this video, but yeah, you know, I know that that was probably sometimes a factor, but I mean, I feel like I'm trying to justify things, I guess, that I probably shouldn't, and make sense of something that's, yeah, fairly hard for, say, for me and my brothers to, you know, make sense of, or has been over the years. Yeah, I don't know. So I guess if I remember anything else when I get home, I'll add some more to this video, but I think really those are kind of like my thoughts on it, because I don't understand this. I don't understand why so many people have such bad relationships with their dads. I know some people have great ones. That's really great. It's almost weird, you know. It's like when you meet someone nowadays who has loads of friends. It's sort of weird. It's like, what the fuck? You have friends? You have a good relationship with your dad? What are you freak? It's just so weird when you encounter that, I find, you know. It might just be the circles I'm in, but yeah, I wonder often, you know, why is it like this, and I think, I guess I've touched on a tiny bit of it here, probably not much, probably not as broadly as I intended to, but battery's dying. Anyway, alright guys, well, thanks for watching. I'll be really interested to know what your guys' experiences are with this, if any of you, you know, it's an awkward thing to talk about. No one wants to fucking talk about their family negatively. I don't want to, and sort of have avoided doing so in this video, so it's hard to talk about these issues, I guess, particularly on the internet where everything's given sort of permanence. It's hard to talk, harder than it would be just with friends privately. But yeah, interested to know anyway what people's experiences are. I'm sure there's some people watching who had good experiences with their dads, you know, and have good relationships, strong relationships, and many who don't. Anyway, alright guys, thanks for watching. Bye.